At a small bookstore in town, clerk Joe flirts with a customer named Ash. They get along and have coffee together while discussing the concept of having a final purpose. They begin dating and eventually form a serious relationship. One morning at a cafe, Joe mentions that he still does not know what Ash's job is. She avoids the question and instead announces that she has something important to tell him, beginning with a "I love you." Nearby, Hunter runs into a man who calls him out for it, so Hunter kills him. Ash claims she is not from here at the table, but Hunter approaches her and shoots her in the head before she can explain. Joe, who is crying, clings to the body as Hunter places the gun on another table. After the initial shock, Joe attempts to follow Hunter, who mysteriously vanishes in an alleyway. For the next 2 weeks, Joe is so depressed that he cancels all of his plans and never leaves the apartment. His friend Oliver continues to try to visit, so Joe eventually lets him in. Oliver has brought Joe coffee, but he can't taste it and feels so weak that he drops the cup. When Oliver tries to comfort Joe, he refuses to listen, so Oliver leaves. That night, Joe purchases a gun and a supply of bullets. He promises to see Ash soon and attempts to delete himself, but nothing happens when he presses the trigger. Joe tries several times, but it doesn't work, so he tests the gun by shooting at the sofa. The bullet does come out and cause some damage, but Joe's attempt to self-delete fails again. The apartment AI hears the gunshot and wants to call the cops, but Joe tells her it was an accident. Joe then shoots the window and jumps out when he hears Ash's voice calling his name. To his surprise, he finds himself floating in the air with all of the glass shards around him. He wakes up in his bed, thinking it was all a dream because the sofa is fine and the gun is still on the table. Joe flees the building after the AI informs him that there are messages from Ash. As he walks down the street, he notices a woman with an unusual look on her face. His phone continues to receive messages from Ash, which should be impossible. He's too scared to look at them and goes to Oliver for advice. Oliver suspects that those are pre-recorded messages Ash prepared in case something happens to her, so Joe decides to open them. A video of Ash appears, explaining that if he sees this, something has happened to her. She needs him to visit the bookstore and pick up a special order in his name. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit room, Erica and 2 operators are tracking Joe's movements. Joe soon arrives at the bookstore and picks up his special order, a small book. The first page contains a love note from Ash, and when Joe reads it, his head hurts and his vision blurs. Thankfully, it only lasts a few minutes, and he is able to leave, unaware that a man is following him. The guy reports to Erica, who tells him to take Joe down and get the book. The operators use their computer to activate additional men, who begin following Joe as well. One of the men even enters the elevator with Joe, pretending to be a tenant. On his way to his apartment, Joe receives a message from Ash stating that the strange may kill him. Joe rushes into his room and attempts to shut the door, but the man blocks it with his foot and opens fire. The home AI attempts to contact the authorities, but she appears to be offline. Joe then runs to get his gun from the table, but misses his shot, so he hides instead. When the man approaches, Joe tries to shoot again but misses. The man prepares to attack, but Joe's body suddenly moves against his will and shoots the stranger with pinpoint accuracy. Joe, who is very confused, hears someone in the corridor and carefully approaches the door. A second attacker appears, and Joe quickly disarms him, resulting in a fight, until Joe suddenly begins dodging at an impressive speed, allowing him to knock the man down with a single move. The man quickly recovers and seeks assistance. When Joe returns to his apartment, he sees Ash on the screen, but it is not a message. It is a live feed. At the same time, the body near his door vanishes. Ash explains that she did not mean to abandon him. She simply had difficulty hacking into the system, and time works differently where she lives. She must first provide some background information. Many years ago, technology began to advance too rapidly. Advanced behavioral modeling and ultra-realistic rendering led to the development of artificial intelligence. All of this was driven primarily by the entertainment industry, but it also drew attention from intelligence agencies. Hunter was a brilliant software engineer who was hired by Centec, a large firm. He gathered as much information from the real world as possible and fed it into a machine to analyze process control, but he also worked on a personal project on the side. His goal was to use all of this data to create a virtual but living reality. Hunter couldn't do it alone, so one day he received a message from another coder offering assistance. They agreed to collaborate and created the first DU, or digital universe, which was a fully developed population. The only thing missing were real people with their own emotions and agency. Hunter began to use his DU to conduct all of his desired tests, ranging from high-risk surgical implants to advanced weapons. Hunter quickly became Centec's CEO, and things began to move even faster. He offered his DU to test anything without consequences, claiming that simulated people were less expensive than real ones. Hunter spent a decade testing and creating nearly 500 DU models before he hit the jackpot with the current one. This makes Joe realize he is nothing more than a computer program, but Ash refers to him as a real man whom she adores. Ash is a real-life woman who works for an intelligence agency, explaining that all of his experiments were unethical and that the government eventually outlawed the modeling technology. Instead of destroying it, Hunter hid it within the digital universe. He disappeared the day he shot Ash due to his admin permissions. But breaking the laws of physics may corrupt the DU and cause glitches because the DU no longer feels real. Ash has been searching for Hunter's hidden technology all along, and while on her mission, she met and fell in love with Joe. The book she sent him contains additional information that they need to get out quickly. While looking at the images Ash used in her story, Joe realizes the other programmers is his friend, Oliver. In real life, Oliver has not been seen in years. Ash wants Joe to contact Oliver and ask for his assistance because she can't get back into the DU, which makes Joe wonder who stopped him from self-deleting and gave him special abilities. Meanwhile, Erica pays a visit to Hunter, who continues to play with a strange orb. She explains that the Joe mission is causing too many problems that her team can't fix quickly enough, and that the only way to ensure that no one gets into the DU again is to isolate it from global networks. However, Hunter refuses to do so because it would disrupt the flow of information. Erica points out that they're risking exposure and that he's killing billions of people, but Hunter only goes on about humanity's advancement. Hunter requests that Erica find the real Ash before leaving. Oliver eventually contacts Ash, but he only has 30 seconds to talk. She tells him she needs his help not only shutting down the DU, but also with Joe. So Oliver promises to stay in touch and hangs up. At that moment, her alarm goes off, signaling the arrival of some armed men wearing strange masks. Ash manages to remain hidden, sneaking out of her apartment when they are not looking. A drone patrols the streets, but she manages to avoid it once more. Ash uses her computer to track Oliver's call. He only lets her in after she proves she does not have any firearms. Ash tells him about her time in the DU and how she's come to accept that the programs are almost like real people. She does not believe they should be experimented on, but they do not deserve to be shut down either. Oliver does not explain why he has been living in the DU, but he does admit that he was the one who stopped Joe from self-deleting and gave him special abilities. He realizes Ash is truly in love with Joe and agrees to help, so he tells her about an old building of his where she can hide for the time being, and she is reunited with Joe. Hunter notices the sudden change in code on his computer. Joe is unsure how to respond to Ash now that he knows he isn't real, but Ash assures him that he is and kisses him. Ash's moment is cut short when she is abruptly pulled out of the digital universe. Oliver explains that he had to do it because Hunter is after them, forcing Ash to flee. Soon, a masked man follows her. In the DU, Joe meets Oliver and begs for assistance. Oliver explains, Ash is in trouble and he believes Hunter will shut down this digital universe soon because all of the glitches aren't worth the trouble and he can simply design a new one. That means Joe and everyone he knows will vanish. Oliver has an idea though. Joe needs to release the data his model is carrying. Years ago, developers would leave things behind in their code, and Oliver confirms that he did the same with this universe. The book Ash sent Joe contained a backup of the entire DU, which was the data Ash had been attempting to extract. Oliver gives Joe a key and instructs him to upload all of the data, go home, and wait for a message with the next steps. Joe accepts the mission, but first he goes to his apartment to get his gun and say goodbye to his AI. In the real world, Ash flees from the masked man who has opened fire. She makes it into an alley and hides behind a dumpster. Unfortunately, as soon as she steps out of the alley, another man hits her. When Ash awakens, she is tied to a chair in Hunter's office. She calls Hunter out for his unethical behavior, and he claims she is no different from him because of what she did to Joe. Hunter then enters the DU to meet with Oliver, who admits he worked with Hunter because he didn't know his true intentions until it was too late. He calls Hunter a psychopath, but promises to stay out of his way. At that point, Hunter's men discover Oliver's true body and shoot him, pulling him out of the digital universe. Seconds later, Joe receives a programmed message from Oliver informing him that he is now alone. Joe enters an old apartment and discovers a computer with all of the data. He places his hand on the control panel and all of the information is immediately sent out. This alerts Erica, who orders her men to stop him. Soon, two men appear outside the window, and Joe uses the key on the screen to open a cabinet full of guns. When the men enter, Joe quickly shoots them down with perfect shots. Joe disappears after hearing Hunter's voice, only to reappear at the harbor outside the city. Hunter is already there and shoots Joe's shoulder before threatening his head, stating that if Joe dies as a result of Hunter's actions, he will not respawn. Hunter then uses his control panel to disarm Joe and make him float before torturing him. Joe is about to be unmade, but when Hunter mentions Ash, he screams angrily and regains control of himself. While Hunter is unsure what is going on, Joe lowers himself to the ground, recovers his gun, and shoots Hunter, returning him to reality. Hunter announces in the office that it's time for a reboot, and Ash begs him to let her say goodbye. Hunter is amused by the fact that she is genuinely in love with software and agrees to make the call. Joe gets to say his final words to Ash as he watches the world around him slowly disintegrate. His body begins to suffer as well, so he tells Ash that he loves her and that, despite his digital identity, his feelings are genuine. Then his phone vanishes, and the ground and buildings disintegrate until only darkness remains. Hunter orders his guard to kill Ash after the computer confirms that the deletion is complete. Oliver's voice interrupts the moment, calling Hunter out, just as the orb on the desk begins to shake. Suddenly, it begins to float and grow larger before disappearing. Hunter is perplexed when Oliver appears on the screen, as his men are accused of murdering the real body. While Oliver explains that he hid different levels of universes within the DU, the orb's particles reappeared and formed a shape that turned out to be Joe. He appears with a gun in his hand and immediately orders the guard to drop his weapon. When Joe turns toward Hunter, the guard grabs his gun again, only for his body to begin glitching. Erica seizes the opportunity to begin beating him until he is unconscious, at which point she declares that Hunter's evil plans are complete and releases Ash. Joe then shoots Hunter multiple times, causing him to fall through the window. Ash and Joe can finally be reunited. Later, Ash and Joe visit Oliver, who explains the universe as a multi-level system and points out that flesh and blood are no different from coding. He only had to cut and paste Joe's code into Ash's level. When Oliver returns home, he takes a drink and disappears into yet another level.